Hey guys, and welcome to Top Channel 101. So today I saw this video by Steven Gentry roasting Blender, and I need you guys to clap back. He made this video which is really amazing. It's just these massive roots growing out of the ground and causing a lot of chaos, dust, smoke, everything really looks amazing. I'm going to leave links in the description. So he says he's using Blender in the title, and then here he pokes fun at Blender saying, nah, I use Houdini and Nuke. So I'm going to need your help to clap back and show that this is actually doable in Blender, and maybe we can even do it better than he did here. I'm going to give you the building blocks on how you can do it yourself. I'm going to show you some of my test renders and what I finally ended up with, so that you can use that as a building block to do something like he did using Houdini. And so here are some of my tests. Here's another one. So here is the final version that I made. Yeah, so we're going to clap back and do something even better in Blender, because roasting Blender is basically blasphemy at this point. But to do this, you're going to need a set of skills and knowledge that you can learn very easily with today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community with thousands of classes on a variety of topics such as Blender animation, marketing, productivity, and more. So whenever I start a new project and I get stuck or get a little bit confused, I always jump to Skillshare because they always have at least a class that will help me out. For example, I know Geometry Nodes uses a lot of vectors, and occasionally I need a refresher class on vectors and how to use them. So I just jump to Skillshare and search for classes about vector math. So currently I'm taking this vector math for physics. It's mathematics for high school physics, but for me, high school was years ago, so I really needed this class to jog my memory just a bit, and it has been very helpful to remind me how to add vectors, solve some physics questions, and just basically get a proper understanding of what vectors are, which is a very useful concept when it comes to geometry nodes, as most of you are well aware. And it's not just about math. Currently, I'm trying to get back into game development, and I'm taking this introduction to 3D game development in Godot so that I can get back into game development with Godot. I love these classes because they are more structured than what you can find on YouTube. Like if it's your first day in Blender, you can take this 1000 Shorty Blender course that takes you through the introduction of Blender in a more structured way, giving you examples and taking you step by step. If you want to give Skillshare a try, the first 500 people to use my link will get 1 month free trial of Skillshare. This is the project file. It's a bit heavy because of this grass, so let me just hide it for a bit, and you can get the project file on my Gumroad, Patreon, and my YouTube membership page. This is what I have. You can see the roots just push through this ground. The ground is using a cloth simulation, and I'm using geometry nodes to extend this cloth so that I can make it look like a ground, and I gave it this ground texture. You can see, so this is the cloth simulation. Okay, so let's open up a new blend file and I'll show you how I set this up. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is create a cloth simulation, and that we're going to use a plane. I'm going to apply the scale and subdivide it a few. Let's go to the physics tab and add a cloth simulation. If I hit play, it will just fall down. What we need is to first lock it down so that it doesn't fall down by creating a vertex group out of the boundary edges. So I'm going to select those and assign a new vertex group like that. If you hit play, and nothing happens because this group hasn't been added to the cloth simulation. So I'm going to scroll down to shape, pin group, and pin that, and now the cloth is only acting down here. Now the other thing I need is to create cuts where our roots are going to explode out. So I'm going to go to edit mode, use K to create cuts, and you can just make a cut like that, hit space to confirm it, and after you make a cut, immediately use Ctrl B to bevel that and assign it into a new group. Let's call it cuts, because we're going to delete those selected faces using geometry nodes. So from there, let's also make another cut. You don't want to make it too wide. Assign. Let's start working with this, and we can add extra cuts as we go. So I'm going to go to geometry nodes here, set up a new geometry nodes, and the first thing I want to do is delete the cuts. We can get the attribute, a named attribute, and we want to use the cuts attribute. If I look at this, You can see we have our cut. I can use the delete geometry and use the cut to delete. It creates a large hole if you're using points. So use faces and change from float to integer to get a more clean cut like that. Okay, so now from there we can just have this above the cloth modifier, and if you hit play, and if you play it and it seems not to work, just click on this icon here, and that should for some reason make it work, and you can even disable it then and it will still work. So that's where we are. Now that we have confirmed that that is working, we can add more cuts. Just like that, assign, and I think that's good. Now the issue we're having is that they are just falling down, so we're going to animate the gravity. So I'll go to the cloth and scroll down to the field weights and turn off gravity. Now nothing happens, so let's create the roots that are going to just explode through this. Let's add a plane. I'll hide this for a second, center this. To make the roots, we're going to distribute some points onto faces and convert these to vertices and extrude these in the Z axis. So I can use the separate and just offset this in the Z axis. I want to extrude vertices, and that's what we have. If we add this in a simulation zone, this and this, you can see that this will extend continuously. Right now we are extruding every vertex, but we only want to extrude the tip. So for that, just make sure that you plug the top into the input of the simulation output, so that is also being used here, and also make sure that you select top here. This will just make sure that only the tips are selected. So since this simulation zone runs in a circle every frame, when you extrude the first time, you extrude the first vertices, you extrude the first vertex we have, so extrude them about there. And if you don't have this selection set up, it will extrude this vertex and it will extrude this vertex because those are all vertices. Now we want to add some rotation to these, so we can use a set position and we can rotate the position using the vector rotate, and just try rotate these as they go. So you can see they are rotating, but the entire thing is rotating. What we can do, we can just rotate this by the length. So as this goes up, we can map the length of the extrusion and use that as influence to determine what gets rotated and what doesn't. So to do that, we can just capture this value here because it's being added on every extrusion. We add this offset. The first vertex is extruded to here, and the next is here, and the next, and the next. Basically, this offset here. So we can capture that by using an accumulate field. So each time this value increases, we can add it here. Another thing I don't want is to have these. Right now, these are all the same height. So what I can do is use a random value to have a different offset for each, and I can even now capture this value. If we look at our spreadsheet and preview this, so you can see that this value is increasing and increasing and increasing and increasing. And if we look at the total, we have about 250 something, and that is determined by I think the value we're putting in here. So let me just use a smaller value so that it's not too high. So we can map this value, use the total here, and we can use this as the angle. And now you can see that we get that these rotated, but they seem to be too fast. So I can use a math node and just multiply by 0.5 to slow this down. Perfect. And I think we might want to, let's say, increase the offset by 1. And that's much better. Now, another thing we could do, we can add more points. So let's start with a few points, just like that, and add more points using the join geometry. So we want to add in more points here, but these won't be extruded unless we include them in this selection. So I can use a capture attribute, change this to Boolean and set it to true, and use a Boolean math and change this to all and basically add this to the selection. Now you can see we have more vertices. Oh, just make sure this capture attribute is outside the simulation zone, because right now it's when the simulation zone runs, it's also adding the vertices that we don't want to extrude back into the extrude mesh. So I'm just going to bypass this, so that is up outside the simulation zone, and that way, like that. So now, now we can see what we have. Another thing we want to do is change the seed on every frame. So I'll use the time and change the seed on every frame. So we are adding more vertices on every frame. Now we can turn this into a mesh. So using the curve to mesh, and this has to be a curve first because we're outputting a mesh. So mesh to curve, and now we can use a profile, a circle. We can use a circle curve as the mesh of the curve, and we can now reduce fill curve just like this. And we don't need all these curves, so we can even delete some using a delete geometry. I delete splines, and we can delete points, but use a random value with the Boolean option to choose what points to delete. And you can see now we don't have as many as we have. You can turn this, bring back our cloth simulation. I can have this just below here, give it a collision setting, and make sure that is what you're previewing is the final output, and give it a collision setting. And if I hit play, you can see it will just push these out of the way, just like that. So now it's just about timing, playing with different settings until you get something that looks exactly as you want. You have to play with a lot of settings to get this right. So let's go to the project I did because I did spend more time on this, and look at what I did. So yeah, I'm going to go to the geometry nodes here and go to the first setup I created. You can see where I deleted the vertices and added a cloth simulation, and then I started working on the geometry nodes here. So in this version, you see that I have two different roots, and one is acting as the collider, because as you can see, when your mesh is not smooth enough, it's going to create a few issues for the clothes, for the cloth simulation. So you might want to add details like a subdivision surface. You might want to add a subdivision surface to smoothen up this a bit, so that is when it collides with the cloth, is colliding with it a little bit better. Maybe we don't need this many resolution for the collider. So you can make this a little bit wider so that we get better collisions. As you can see, yeah, so I think that looks better. And you don't want the cloth to continue simulating like this. So after this pushes through, you can select the cloth and animate the speed multiplier and make it something like 0.1. That way the cloth is simulated in slow motion until it stops. Or you can even go even a step further and make it 0.01, so that is it basically comes to a standstill, just like that, so that it shows the ground has settled. You can even spread these keyframes out so that it comes, to a slow position, just like that. Now, if you want to add ground, you can create another geometry nodes after the cloth and just do an extrude vertex, extrude faces just like this, and that should extrude the faces. You can use a repeat zone because we want to do a lot of extrusion, a few extrusions. This extrusion should be in the repeat zone. That way we can, if we turn on wireframe, you can extrude this one more time, maybe even twice. It is extruding in the wrong direction. And again, you want to only extrude, you don't want to extrude everything. So we're going to do the same trick that we did in the simulation, just like, yeah, something like this. Now we're missing the top part that we can just bring it back by using a join geometry around here. Just join the original mesh to this mesh, and you can see what we get. Now we need this to be a bit smoother, and actually push this a bit down and also smoothen this a bit. So I'm going to use a set position and use a position. I think I can do it here. So I can use a set position, bring in a position node, and use a blur node vector to smoothen this. But we don't want to separate this from the rest of the mesh. The more you smoothen, the more it is going to try and separate itself. Just use the top selection to stop it from doing that. Yeah, so that's how you do that. From there, you can set the materials for the extruded part, and you can see that, like I said, I have two roots. So one is the collider and the other is roots that we are going to render. Those needed more detailed, and the project file is going to be available to examine. So after I extrude the roots, I even smoothen them out using a subdivision surface so that they look smoother, and turn them to a mesh. And then the set radius is to make them smaller at the tip. And now we have the roots like that. I don't want to make this tutorial too long. That's why you see I'm skipping some of the detail, but most of these are things we have looked at in different tutorials. So you can see it collides with them, creating a much smoother transition. And you can see I even animated the speed multiplier to slow down I think I slow it down, yeah, right there. And then I added in this particle system to shoot. You can see it's just a simple mesh like this, and I have a particle system that shoots particles out like that. We don't stop there, because we also needed to add grass, as you can see. So for the grass, I basically duplicated the cloth object. As you can see, that's the grass. Just instanced a hair particle system on that, and I used that as a grass. I used the same particle system to create a smoke simulation that I turned into dust. That's it. If you're able to do something like this, you can let me know in the comments.